Hello, it's Wednesday, the 18th of January, 2023, and you called me about to look at some more LaserDiscs that I recently bought.
Right, so this is continuing to make my way through the 40 discs in this box that I recently bought from South Australia. So let's see what's in here, huh? This is a 1989 Japanese Laserdisc from CBS Fox for The Hidden, a 1987 sci-fi action horror movie directed by Jack Sholder. Yeah, The Hidden is a movie I really like. It's a sort of a gloriously over-the-top, action-packed, kind of trashy, but immensely fun and pretty imaginative movie. So this movie stars Kyle MacLachlan as a sort of a mysterious, kooky FBI agent who's sort of hunting a sort of a body jumping entity that's sort of taking over various people and causing them to sort of engage in lots of crime and violence, stealing cars, killing lots of people, etc. Michael Nouri is the cop that that Kyle MacLachlan's character falls in with, and so it's kind of like a mixture of buddy cop movie and sort of science fiction, because the plot as it unfolds, it involves aliens and stuff. So this is a really good movie. It's got lots of really great moments, some sort of gross out horror effects. So it was directed by Jack Sholder, who's a pretty interesting director. He directed a really good 1982 slasher movie, Alone in the Dark, and then he directed in 1985, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, which is actually my favorite of all the Freddy Krueger movies. Kyle MacLachlan, as usual, is good in this, and it's interesting to watch this movie, given that MacLachlan plays ostensibly an FBI agent who's on the trail of a body jumping murderous entity. This movie is kind of like an interesting precursor to Twin Peaks, which was made only a couple of years after. So that's another reason to see it. If you're a Twin Peaks fan, this is sort of worth watching. 1987 was actually a pretty great year for action movies. I mean, off the top of my head, there was Lethal Weapon, RoboCop, Predator, The Running Man, Extreme Prejudice, The Hidden. It's probably more that I can't think of, but there were a lot of great action movies from 1987, and I think this is definitely one of them. Any movie that ends with a climax involving gate crashing, a press conference to use a flamethrower to take out a politician who's possessed by an evil alien slug, that is a movie that is touched with greatness. Another Japanese Laserdisc. This one's from RCA Columbia Pictures from 1988, and it's a Laserdisc of the 1938 romantic comedy Holiday, starring Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. This was directed by the great George Cukor. This is a really good film. They made really good romantic comedies in the 1930s, and I'm a big fan of Cary Grant. I'm a big fan of Katharine Hepburn, two of my favorite screen presences, and they're really good in this. Cary Grant plays a guy who's engaged, and he sort of goes to meet his fiance's family to stay with them, and they're like really rich. And Katharine Hepburn is his fiance's older sister that he falls in love with, and there's all sorts of entanglements and complications and stuff. Lou Ayres is in this. He's really good. He plays Katharine Hepburn's sort of sad alcoholic brother. George Cukor was a great filmmaker. He directed Katharine Hepburn several times before making Holiday, and he worked with her quite a few times after it. Cukor also directed the 1954 version of A Star Is Born, the one with Judy Garland and James Mason, which I have talked about in a previous video. I do have the Laserdisc for that one. Yeah, this is a really good film. It's actually a remake of a film from 1930 starring Mary Astor, which I've not seen. But yeah, I think this film. I think it was also. I think Katharine Hepburn was going through a bit of a box office lull at that time, and I think this movie sort of put her back on the top as far as bankable stars go. Of course, she sort of remained one of the best and most reliable actresses, for decades thereafter. Here we have a 1988 Japanese Laserdisc from ABC Video for Junior Bonner, the 1972 movie directed by Sam Peckinpah and starring Steve McQueen. I'm a huge fan of Sam Peckinpah, the films of Sam Peckinpah, and I'm a huge fan of Steve McQueen. This was the first film that Peckinpah and McQueen made. It's interesting. This is the movie that Peckinpah did after Straw Dogs in 1971. Straw Dogs was hugely controversial for its violence and its rape sequence. This is a very different kind of movie. Peckinpah he'd done sort of more gentle lyrical dramas like Noon Wine and The Ballad of Cable Hogue, but by the early '70s he was still best known for his violent movies like The Wild Bunch and Straw Dogs. So this is a return to sort of the more dramatic sort of domestic drama sort of side of Peckinpah. So Steve McQueen plays an aging sort of past his prime rodeo champ who sort of returns to his hometown in Prescott, Arizona. There's the Independence Day parade, and there's a rodeo that he wants to compete on, and he's kind of sort of has to confront some family issues. He's reunited with his estranged family. His mother, played by Ida Lupino, his sort of ne'er-do-well alcoholic father, played by Robert Preston, and his ambitious brother, who's like into real estate development. He's played by Joe Don Baker. So yeah, this is a very interesting movie. It's very good. It didn't really do especially well at the time. I think Sam Peckinpah later complained, I made a movie where no one gets shot and nobody came to see it. The next film that Peckinpah made after this, I think, was The Getaway, with Steve McQueen in 1973, which was a sort of a rip roaring action movie. But Junior Bonner, it's one of those movies that it wasn't especially well regarded at the time, but it's sort of been reappraised, and it's a sort of a low key, unpretentious movie, very well made. It's not a raging masterpiece or anything, but it's certainly worth watching, especially if you're a fan of Steve McQueen or Sam Peckinpah. Even though he's an immeasurably cool, iconic screen presence, I don't think Steve McQueen ever really got the respect he deserved as an actor. Especially in the 1970s, McQueen was sort of very interested in not necessarily doing star turns. He wanted to make films that were interesting to him. And Junior Bonner, I think, is McQueen was a really good dramatic actor, and Junior Bonner is it's a good film to check out. Midnight Cowboy. This is a 1988 Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video. The film was originally released by United Artists in 1969. This is a pretty good movie. Well, it's a great movie. It's a classic movie starring one of the most famous on-screen team ups ever, I guess, with Dustin Hoffman and John Voight. So John Voight plays Joe Buck, the sort of would-be gigolo that moves to New York City, which turns out to be a very exceedingly harsh environment. And Dustin Hoffman plays Ratso Rizzo, the sort of the terminally ill, sort of scheming street rat that teams up with him, and the sort of strange friendship and partnership that develops between these two guys. So this movie was actually it was rated X, and it still won a Best Picture Academy Award, which was pretty rare at the time. Directed by John Schlesinger, who's a really good filmmaker. He's made lots of good films. This is a good movie. It's a very depressing movie. I don't know. It's not a film I really go back to all that often, because even though it's over 50 years old, it's still it's still quite affecting, I think. So the music is sort of inextricable from this movie. So the music score is by John Barry. It's a really good music score. It's got a really good title sequence, and the song "Everybody's Talking" by Harry Nilsson, was quite famously used on the soundtrack for this. So it's interesting. Everybody's talking. It was one of Harry Nilsson's biggest, most well-known hits. Nilsson didn't write the song. Nilsson was a genius songwriter, but Everybody's Talking was written by Fred Neil, and Nilsson recorded a cover version for his, I think it was his third album, Aerial Ballet, in 1968. When John Schlesinger was making this movie, he sort of used Everybody's Talking as a temp track, and then he wanted Nilsson to sort of do something in the same kind of vein, an original song. I think Nilsson got to see a rough cut of the film, and he thought it was the greatest film he'd ever seen, and he was really excited to write a song for it. So Nilsson actually wrote and recorded the song, I Guess the Lord Must Be in New York City, which is kind of it's very similar to Everybody's Talking, but it's different enough. It's not a precise sound alike. But anyway, I think Schlesinger had become so attached to Everybody's Talking that he ended up using that in the actual movie. Although I guess The Lord Must Be in New York City ended up getting used in Nilsson's fourth album, Harry, from 1969. Yeah, I suppose you can't really argue against the use of Everybody's Talking in this. It is used really well. This is a 1988 Japanese laserdisc from CIC Video for Beverly Hills Cop 2. We can see Eddie Murphy on the Obi strip there. Okay, so Beverly Hills Cop 2 was released in 1987. The original Beverly Hills Cop, directed by Martin Brest, was released in 1984. It was the biggest money earner of 1984. And so 3 years later, there was inevitably the sequel. So again, this stars Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley. This is a film in which Foley goes from Detroit to Beverly Hills after his friend Captain Bogomil, played by Ronnie Cox of the Beverly Hills Police Department, is shot. And so Foley returns to LA and he teams up again with his old buddies, Billy Rosewood and John Taggart, and they investigate Bogomil's shooting and get caught up in this plot involving these like high-class European crooks led by Jürgen Prochnow, Brigitte Nielsen, and Dean Stockwell. Okay, I have to be honest. For years, Beverly Hills Cop was, I would say undoubtedly was my favorite of all the Beverly Hills Cop movies. I've actually come around over the years to preferring Beverly Hills Cop 2. I think Beverly Hills Cop 2 is great. I think it's better than the original, and I think it's really underrated. I mean, and the movie was a big hit, but I don't think it doesn't really have the pop culture cachet of the original. And I mean, it doesn't have quite the same freshness of premises as the original, but I still think this is a really good movie. I think one of the reasons I like the sequel is because Foley, Rosewood, and Taggart are sort of a team from the get-go. Like in the original, Taggart and Rosewood are kind of non-villainous antagonists to Axel Foley, and they're sort of like at cross purposes for much of the film, and they only really team up at the end. I really like the teamwork that they have in this movie. This movie's got lots of really good bits in it, and I think Taggart and Rosewood are especially good in this movie. It's interesting when there's a documentary on the making of the original Beverly Hills Cop, and it's revealed that on script, Taggart and Rosewood, they weren't like especially interesting characters, and I think Martin Brest encouraged Judge Reinhold and John Ashton to kind of come up with something to sort of make them interesting, and they hit upon the idea of playing Taggart and Rosewood like an old married couple. So like Billy Rosewood is like the sort of the nagging wife, and Taggart is like the henpecked husband. So we have those scenes where Billy is kind of nagging Taggart, telling him that he eats too much red meat and maybe he's tense because he drinks too much coffee, and there's all that, and like Taggart has this kind of slow burning exasperation. What's really interesting is that in Beverly Hills Cop 2 they don't really rehash that dynamic. They do something a little bit more interesting because in Beverly Hills Cop 2 Axel Foley is sort of integrated into this sort of weird family dynamic. The way they play it is kind of like Axel and Taggart are kind of like the exasperated parents, and Billy is like this sort of weird, quirky, rebellious son that they're constantly sort of, baffled by. Like there's all these running jokes involving Billy's his pet turtle and his weird home life and his gun collection, and there's that catchphrase, "Billy, we got to talk." So I kind of like what they do with that. It's sort of, I think the film, I think it's a lot more interesting than it's really given credit for. Although of course, being an 80s film, it's got the sort of the requisite sort of violence and sleaze and sort of misogyny. Like you've got John Ashton like emptying his gun into Brigitte Nielsen and sort of smirking at the camera as he does it. So this movie was directed by Tony Scott, who just come off directing Top Gun in 1986. So it's got a very different visual style than the original Beverly Hills Cop. The original film was much more, I guess, it felt sort of more. It wasn't especially flashy. It had a very kind of earthy feel to it. Whereas Beverly Hills Cop 2 is much more the color palette and the style and the cinematography. It's got more of a sort of a sleek, kind of music video look to it, which is Tony Scott came from a background of directing commercials, so it's not surprising. I think Tony Scott was an underrated filmmaker. I think this is one of his best movies. So Yeah, so this movie, like the original, was produced by Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. Harold Faltermeyer provides the music score as he did in the first one, so we get lots of use of his famous Axel F theme. Paul Reiser is back in this. Bronson Pinchot is not. Yeah, Eddie Murphy's really good in this movie. He kind of dials up the sort of obnoxious wiseassery of Axel Foley, like even more so than in the first film. Like he does a lot more shtick in this. And there's a really good supporting cast actually. Alan Garfield plays the sort of arsehole police chief, superior Chief Lutz. He's really good in this. He's really funny. And Gilbert Gottfried has a really good cameo appearance in this as Sidney Bernstein. I'm a big fan of the late Gilbert Gottfried, and he's really good in this. Incidentally, I used to think that Eddie Murphy got Gilbert Gottfried into this movie because the two of them had been on Saturday Night Live together in the show's infamous sixth season in 1980-81. Gilbert Gottfried was one of the main cast members, and Eddie Murphy had sort of joined as a minor cast member. But I think apparently that had nothing to do with it. I don't know if Eddie Murphy even remembered Gilbert Gottfried being in SNL from that time. Incidentally, the very first Beverly Hills Cop movie I ever saw was Beverly Hills Cop 3, which I actually really, really liked. I didn't really have any basis for comparison, so that was the first one I saw. Then I went back and watched 1 and 2, and of course, I've come to regard number 3 as not very good. I think Beverly Hills Cop 2 is the best of the series. I mean, I love Beverly Hills Cop. I love Beverly Hills Cop 2, but if I had to choose my favorite of the series, I would go for Beverly Hills Cop 2. If I had to choose my 5 favorite Eddie Murphy movies, my top 5 in chronological, not preferential order, it would be 48 Hours, Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop 2, and Coming to America. So yeah, apologies to any fans of The Golden Child. Another great movie from 1987. This is a Japanese laserdisc from Columbia TriStar Home Video for RoboCop, the 1987 science fiction action classic. So it's interesting. This the sleeve says 1993, but the Obi strip says 1994. So I'm guessing this was released in maybe it was released in 1993, and the 1994 is referring to something else, maybe upcoming releases or something. Anyway. So yeah, RoboCop. This is a movie that it's going to be kind of difficult for me. I can't really summarize, what I think about RoboCop, because it's just flat out one of my favorite movies, one of the greatest films ever made. A movie that kind of, I think, maybe took people by surprise in 1987, and its reputation has only gotten better since. So this is the sort of set in the near future dystopia of Detroit, with crime running rampant, and a sort of evil military consumer corporation, OCP, kind of influencing the government. And so you've got Paul Weller as Alex Murphy, the sort of virtuous cop that's killed in the line of duty by a group of scumbag criminals, and he's brought back as a RoboCop, as sort of a cybernetically enhanced android. And this is just such a great movie. It's sort of gleeful, like black comic, satirical comment on like Reaganism and the military and the police. And it's, I think Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner, the screenwriters, they sort of called this movie fascism for liberals, or was it liberalism for fascists? I don't know. But anyway, it's a really good movie, fantastic special effects, and what a great cast. You've got obviously Paul Weller, you've got Nancy Allen as Anne Lewis's partner, you've got such great villains in this. Ronnie Cox as Dick Jones, which was kind of a change of pace for Ronnie Cox, because prior to this he'd been known for playing like decent characters, and in this he's like a venal corporate scumbag. There's also probably the first major film role for Kurtwood Smith as Clarence Boddicker, who has a great gang of criminals, with great character actors like Paul McCrane and Ray Wise, and and this is a very over the top, very violent, movie, but it's it's got the commercial parodies. It's a movie that I think no one at the time really knew what they were getting with it. Like the actors, especially, they were kind of surprised by the film that was made. I think they didn't really get the nuance and the satire in the script. But yeah, this is such a good film. Miguel Ferrer is in this as well. He's really good as Bob Morton. Yeah, you can tell at this point I'm really just blabbering. Great score by Basil Polduris as well. RoboCop was the first American film made by the Dutch filmmaker Paul Verhoeven. And after this sort of led to Verhoeven's career in Hollywood, in making films like Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, Starship Troopers, etc. There's great stop motion animation by Phil Tippett for the Ed 209 Android. There's the wonderful makeup effects by Rob Bottin. Yeah, this is a movie. It's kind of I would say this is a flawless movie. There's not really anything I can fault with this. It's it's kind of a movie that I'm sure to audiences at the time they probably just thought it was a big dumb action movie. In fact, Paul Verhoeven, when he got the script that said RoboCop, he threw it in the trash, and I think it was his wife that convinced him to take another look at it because there was more to it than what it seemed. So the version of RoboCop on this Laserdisc was 102 minutes. I assume this is the original theatrical version. There is a longer director's cut that was released on the Criterion Laserdisc and also on DVD and Blu-ray, which restores some moments of violence that were edited out of the film to secure an R rating from the MPAA for its theatrical release back in 1987. There's Dick Jones with Ed 209, of course, and of poor old Emil Antonowski, coming to an end after coming into contact with toxic waste. Yeah, so it's hitting some of the high points there. Sort of go back and forth on the question of which 1980s action movie had the best bad guy gang. For me, it comes down between Hans Gruber's gang in Die Hard and Clarence Boddicer's gang in RoboCop. I feel that they both have their merits. I think if you want, if you want to, execute an intricate heist, you would use Gruber's men. If you just want some, deranged, violent, assholes to just sort of, go out and cause chaos, you'd probably lean to Boddicer's gang. But they're both despicably vile, and effectively entertaining in their ways. So RoboCop was a really big hit, and it inevitably led to a franchise. There were two film sequels. There was RoboCop 2 in 1990 and RoboCop 3 in 1993. There was a children's animated television series, amazingly enough. There were at least two live-action television series, and in 2014 there was a film remake of the original. But there's no substitute for the original 1987 RoboCop. I'd buy that for $1, or in this case, I paid $5 for it. This is a 1982 Japanese Laserdisc for The Lion in Winter. So this is from 20th Century Fox Video. So this was released before 20th Century Fox Video became CBS Fox. Okay, so The Lion in Winter, this was a 1968 film version directed by Anthony Harvey of the 1966 play by James Goldman. Goldman did the screenplay for this as well. Yeah, so this is actually a really, really fantastic movie. It's kind of it's like a fictional but kind of historical based chamber drama. It's kind of like a crazy family soap opera set in Christmas in a castle. It's late 12th century England, like 1183. It's about King Henry II of England and his estranged wife Eleanor of Aquitaine and their three sons. There's John Castle as Prince Geoffrey, Anthony Hopkins as Prince Richard, and Nigel Terry as Prince John. Yeah, and it's to do with political machinations and sort of domestic squabbling, and very sort of the dialogue in this movie is great. I'd love to see the play live on stage. So this movie was a big hit. One of the highest grossing films of its year, and it did win some Academy Awards. John Barry won an Academy Award for his music score. James Goldman won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, and Katharine Hepburn won a Best Actress Academy Award for this. So we'll have a look. We can see it's a gatefold. So it's a really, really nice looking release. Yeah, I think yeah, this is such an entertaining movie. Incidentally, Henry II, Peter O'Toole had played the same character in the movie Beckett with Richard Burton some years before this. So I guess in a weird way, you could kind of consider this a quasi sequel to Beckett, although it's a very different movie. I do have a DVD of this movie with a lot of behind the scenes, like retrospective documentaries in it that are really good. The stars all sort of speak well of Katharine Hepburn. So Anthony Hopkins, this was his first movie. He'd done obviously been on stage. This is his first movie, and he was very nervous and insecure with it. And I think he remembered Katharine Hepburn sort of taking him aside and saying to him, don't act. You have a good voice, you have a good body. You don't need to act. Let me act. I act all over the place. So she was very, reassuring of Anthony Hopkins and John Castle. John Castle, who plays Prince Geoffrey, he recalled a very nice anecdote. He was sort of cold in the set, and Katharine Hepburn sort of noticed that he was cold. And the next day, she brought a sweater to give to him between takes to keep him warm. So he put it on and said, it's a nice sweater. And Katharine Hepburn said, yes, that was one of Spencer's favorites. And John Castle realized that Katharine Hepburn had just given him one of Spencer Tracy's sweaters, which is a very sweet story. So Jane Merrow is in this. She's really good, and Timothy Dalton is in this. So it's interesting. I think it was after this movie in 1968 that the producers of the James Bond series, Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli, sort of had the idea of maybe Timothy Dalton being the next James Bond after Sean Connery had quit. They asked Timothy Dalton at the time, but he thought he was too young, and so he didn't accept it. Obviously, he accepted the role when it was offered to him some years later. Yeah, so obviously, Peter O'Toole is really good. He's one of my favorite actors, Peter O'Toole. He's just, very commanding. He kind of chooses scenery in this, but in the best way that Peter O'Toole does. Katharine Hepburn is always great. Jane Merrow's good, Timothy Dalton's good, Anthony Hopkins is good. They're all good in this. John Castle is kind of the one guy in this that sort of never really became a big star, but he's really good. Incidentally, one of my favorite John Castle roles was playing a snidey villain in the movie RoboCop 3 of all things. He's really good in that. It's sort of a guilty pleasure movie, RoboCop 3, but yeah. The Lion in Winter, definitely worth watching. There was a 2003 remake starring Patrick Stewart and Glenn Close. I've not seen that version, but I much as I like Patrick Stewart and Glenn Close, I very much doubt it could be anywhere near as good as this movie. This is actually a really good Christmas movie. Incidentally, if you like movies set in Christmas starring squabbling families, watch this. It's really good. Another great movie directed by Tony Scott. This is The Last Boy Scout, a 1992 Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video for the 1991 movie. There's Bruce Willis, of course. So yeah, I think this is one of my favorite movies. It's really good. I think it's kind of underrated. This movie. It was written by Shane Black, who wrote Lethal Weapon, and this is kind of another like mismatched, buddy action movie. Bruce Willis plays Joe Hallenbeck, who's a sort of an ex-Secret Service turned private eye, and Damon Wayans is Jimmy Dix, a professional American football player, and they sort of end up getting thrown together and trying to solve this this mystery that sort of involves corruption in the American Football League, and then it ends up escalating into this plot of assassination and stuff. So this is a very funny movie. It's immensely quotable. This film, I kind of feel that this is sort of the best Die Hard movie that isn't a Die Hard movie. I mean, it's got great one-liners, great action. Damon Wayans is pretty good in this. He hasn't always been. His films haven't always really been the best. Although I do regard Blank Man as a guilty pleasure. Bruce Willis is in this. There's a lot of really great. There's an early role for Halle Berry in this. She plays Damon Wayans' girlfriend. She sort of doesn't really make it past the first reel. I really like Taylor Negron as one of the bad guys in this. He plays Mr. Milo. If you've seen Shane Black movies written by Shane Black, he tends to like sort of quirky like bad guys, like giving them sort of kind of funny, dialogue, and sort of making them sort of a bit more interesting to watch, and not just be obstacles or cannon fodder. Yeah, so this is I really like this movie. There's a great music score by Michael Kamen, who was kind of the go-to guy for scoring action movies at that time. Yeah, so I really love this movie. It's got a fantastic over-the-top climax set in a football stadium. Yeah, I sort of regard The Last Boy Scout as being like the last 80s action movie. I mean, it was released in 1991, but it definitely feels it definitely feels like the last movie, or the last good movie of that particular breed of 80s action film. I mean, to sort of put it in perspective, this movie was released the same year as Point Break, another action movie. And when you look at those two movies, they kind of feel like they're sort of from different eras. Like Point Break feels very much like a 90s action movie, whereas The Last Boy Scout feels much more like an 80s action movie, if that makes sense. Shane Black, of course, in addition to being a very popular and successful screenwriter, went on to become a director as well. And if you've seen some of the movies that he's directed, like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, with Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer, and The Nice Guys with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe, they feel kind of a piece with this movie. You can sort of see definite similarities between them. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, one of the best movie titles of all time, one of the best movies of all time. I love this movie. This was directed and co-written by Sam Peckinpah, released in 1974. Originally released by United Artists. This is a Warner Home Video Japanese laserdisc from 1990. I've seen this movie quite a few times. I really like it. It stars the great Warren Oates, one of my favorite actors, as a sort of down on his luck guy who tries to pursue a bounty by getting the head of the titular Alfredo Garcia, which is being sought by a sort of a Mexican crime lord, and it's all to do with what happens in his attempts to do that. Yeah, it's kind of a grim, downbeat sort of movie. It's got a sort of a pessimistic ending, and it's there's a sort of a vein of like desperation and cynicism that runs through the movie. I mean, I think Peckinpah was kind of at a especially personal point of his life. I think he was doing a lot of cocaine, he was doing a lot of alcohol, and there's this kind of like feverish, sweaty kind of feel running through this movie. And there's the ending I said is a bit of a downer, and there's also a really sort of cynical, grim scene involving Chris Christopherson as a sort of a passing scumbag rapist. But Warren Oates is good in this. Isela Vega as his girlfriend, she's good in this too. This movie, it was actually it was really critically slated. It was absolutely loathed at the time. I think Roger Ebert was one of the few prominent critics to sort of go out on a limb and suggest that this was a great movie. I think Harry and Michael Medved actually named this one of the worst movies of all time in one of their Golden Turkey books, which is kind of staggering. I mean, I think this is possibly, I don't know if it's Peckinpah's best movie. It's probably my favorite Peckinpah movie. I just love this movie. It's really fantastic, and it's kind of influential. I think in a way you sort of see it being the title certainly being referenced and homaged, but there are other sequences that get that have turned up. I think the Robert Rodriguez's Sin City, there's a sequence in that which is kind of clearly referencing this movie. But I really love this movie, in case you can't tell. Angel Heart from 1987, directed and scripted by Alan Parker. This is a Japanese laserdisc released by Toa Video. Okay, so Angel Heart is one of my favorite movies, a sort of mystery thriller kind of horror movie starring Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke plays a sort of a private investigator, Harry Angel, who in 1940s New York is hired by the mysterious Louis Cypher, played by Robert De Niro, to find a missing person, Johnny Favorite. And then Harry's investigation takes him to New Orleans, and he's sort of drawn into this really strange mystery involving voodoo and the series of brutal murders, and Lisa Bonet as a girl, Epiphany Proudfoot. And it sort of, the movie just ramps up the craziness, and it just sort of builds to a kind of a horrifying ending. Alan Parker, the great Alan Parker, he's made, he's directed a lot of really good films. Some of my favorite films he directed, Midnight Express, Bugsy Malone, Shoot the Moon, Pink Floyd, The Wall, Birdie, The Commitments, and this is one of my favorite movies of his. Mickey Rourke was coming off it's sort of well, Mickey Rourke was like in the midst of a really great run of movies in the 1980s. This is one of his best roles, very well shot. It's got a great cast. Robert De Niro, Lisa Bonet, Charlotte Rampling, Dan Florek. The movie it's based on the novel Falling Angel by William Hertzberg from I think it was from 1978. I have read the book and it's pretty good. Although I think the movie improves on it in some respects. So this is a really good. I really like that. I really like that design. I think Lisa Bonet sort of. I mean, there was a lot of notoriety attached to this movie because of the fairly explicit sex scene between Mickey Rourke and Lisa Bonet. I think it actually was Lisa Bonet chucked off the Cosby Show for doing nudity in this film, which I guess in hindsight is especially ironic. Given what we know, what Bill Cosby was getting up to behind the scenes. But this is I really like this movie. Some sort of random thoughts about this movie. Robert De Niro, the sort of the exposition scene where he hires Harry Angel. There's he kind of De Niro is kind of I think he was kind of channeling Martin Scorsese in his portrayal of Louis Cypher, and he's got like these sort of long fingernails, and he's got a sequence where he's talking about eating an egg, and he's like cracking a boiled egg with his fingers, and it's kind of queasy. And I think this movie actually has one of the all-time great taglines. The original poster, I think it was Harry Angel is searching for the truth, pray he doesn't find it, which is great line. Paths of Glory, the 1957 movie directed and co-written by Stanley Kubrick. This is a 1998 Japanese laserdisc from MGM UA Home Entertainment. So this is one of the greatest movies ever made. A great anti-war movie starring Kirk Douglas. So this movie's set in the Western Front in 1916, and it's to do with sort of like hypocrisy in the echelons of the French military. So there's a battalion, a regiment of soldiers that sort of refuse to mount a suicidal attack, and they're sort of railroaded and tried for cowardice. And Kirk Douglas is the colonel that defends them. So it was directed by Stanley Kubrick and produced by Kubrick's filmmaking partner James B. Harris. Kubrick co-wrote the screenplay with Calder Willingham and Jim Thompson. It's based on a novel by Humphrey Cobb, which I've not read. This is a really good movie. It's kind of, I mean, like a lot of Kubrick movies, it's sort of unrelentingly pessimistic in its view of human nature. And I guess with this movie and with Full Metal Jacket, which Kubrick made 30 years later, he sort of made two sort of great movies about the sort of brutal inhumanity of war. So this is the first time that Kubrick and Kirk Douglas had worked together. A few years later, Kirk Douglas was making Spartacus, which was originally supposed to be directed by I think it was Anthony Mann, and then there were some complications, and Anthony Mann got fired, and Kirk Douglas brought Stanley Kubrick in to direct the movie. I think Kubrick and Kirk Douglas had a pretty contentious relationship, but they worked really well together in this movie and in Spartacus. But this is one of Kubrick's best films. 1971's Straw Dogs. This is a 1988 Japanese laserdisc from ABC Video. So Straw Dogs, directed and co-written by Sam Peckinpah, based on the novel The Siege of Trencher's Farm by Gordon Williams. This is a movie that, I mean, it's difficult to say that it's an enjoyable film. It's hugely effective, very controversial in its time for its depiction of rape and violence. I think this might be Sam Peckinpah's best movie. I think it's sort of misunderstood. So you've got Dustin Hoffman as an American mathematician who has a young British wife, played by Susan George, and they travel back to Cornwall, where Susan George is from, where Dustin Hoffman's character is going to, he's working on a project, and it's all to do with them getting harassed by these like sort of local loutish characters, and then it's all to do with violence and territoriality, and yeah, and it's sort of I think the movie, it's sort of, I think it's sort of misrepresented. It's sort of, people kind of tend to regard it as a sort of a revenge movie, a movie about a pacifist, sort of a weak pacifist liberal man who's sort of pushed too far, and then he learns to sort of, embrace his, his brutality and fight back. I think Sam Peckinpah regarded Dustin Hoffman's character as the villain in this movie, and there is something to that. Hoffman's character, he's kind of a slimy, unlikable, wormy sort of guy. He's not really sympathetic. I mean, I think Susan George's character is kind of the most sympathetic, and even she's sort of morally compromised. By her, the stand that she takes towards the end of this movie. This is a movie that just sort of builds up dramatically, where characters are sort of all like misunderstanding, and they're sort of proceeding without the full scope of information being available to them. And so, yeah, it's really good. I mean, and it just sort of builds up to this sort of frenzied, violent climax. So I've seen this movie quite a few times. I've got the Criterion Blu-ray, and I did see it on the big screen in 2021 as part of the British Film Festival. And it's still a hugely effective film, despite being 50 years old. It's still it still retains its potency and its power, I think. I think, ironically, the movie was, there were edits made to the movie which kind of harmed the film, especially the rape sequence, which is quite infamous and is very hard to watch. But it was edited in such a way to supposedly to make it, less. Less horrifying, but in a way they kind of sanitized it and sort of ended up giving the wrong impression of the victim in that sequence. Interestingly, David Warner is mentioned on the sleeve there. So David Warner, he is in the movie, but he wasn't officially credited in the film. He didn't receive any on-screen billing, but he is mentioned there. I love the austere minimalist design of this sleeve. I mean, you've just got a frame from the movie and the title of the film in very sort of non-fancy, unfrilled style. So this is a movie that just, I just feel that the tension that ratchets up until the climactic sequence with the home invasion and the siege, and Dustin Hoffman fighting off these really nasty characters, and then the movie, it just ends in such a way where in Hoffman's mind, it's a triumphant moment for him, but the movie, it sort of doesn't let, there's no catharsis for the audience. It kind of, there's a gulf between what Hoffman thinks he's done and what he's actually done, and the movie, it ends on a final note that's very, it's kind of grimly ironic. This is a movie that sort of has no, it's, I don't know if it's Peckinpah's, unrelentingly bleak and cynical view of humanity, the veneer of civilization, but it's a movie that I think, I think it was misunderstood then. It might still be misunderstood. It's not an easy watch by any means. A motif that we see recurring in some of Peckinpah's films is the passing of an old world and the emergence of a new one. Essentially, the Old West giving way to modern civilization, and we see this idea in The Wild Bunch, The Ballad of Cable Hogue, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and even to an extent in Junior Bonner. The getaway is kind of escapism, and then we have this other motif that permeates some of Peckinpah's other films, which is more to do with humanity just being beyond redemption, and just burn everything down, and that's kind of the theme that we get in Straw Dogs, and also in Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, and possibly in some other Peckinpah films. Incidentally, I love the original theatrical trailer for Straw Dogs, which has the voiceover man bombastically narrating that now Sam Peckinpah unleashes Dustin Hoffman, which words that were probably never said before or since. I mean, unleashing Dustin Hoffman, I mean, is pretty it's It's very strange to hear. This is a 1986 Japanese laserdisc for Diva, the 1981 movie directed by Jean-Jacques Benex. Yeah, so this is interesting. This movie, I first heard of it. It was reviewed by Danny Perry in his book Cult Movies 3. I think it was Cult Movies 3, and I bought the DVD and watched it. It's a really good movie. It's sort of a kind of a sort of a. It's difficult to describe really plot wise. It's like a mystery involving corrupt policemen, thieves, an opera fan, an opera singer, like a cassette. It's a movie that you really just have to watch it to sort of get what it's all about. It was part of that new wave of French cinema at the time that had a very distinctive look, a very sort of glossy, slick, kind of gorgeous look to it. There's a really good chase sequence through the Paris metro. And of course, Jean-Jacques Benex, he went on to direct Betty Blue in 1986, which is a really good movie as well. Yeah, so this is yeah, I really like this movie. I haven't watched it for a while. I really need to watch it again. So this was Jean-Jacques Benex's first feature film as director. Interestingly, it didn't do especially well in France upon its release. It kind of it became successful in America. It kind of took off with critics there. I think Roger Ebert gave it a 4-star review, and that sort of caused it. I think it sort of belatedly became people in France actually started taking notice of it. I think that's what happened, and it became a cult. It became a cult film. This is a great film, Arthur Penn's Little Big Man from 1970, starring Dustin Hoffman. This is a 1984 Japanese laserdisc from CBS Fox Video. Yeah, so this is a very interesting film. It's a sort of revisionist western slash comic epic film. The movie stars Dustin Hoffman as Jack Crabb, a 121-year-old white man who in 1970 recounts the amazing story of his life, or at least what he remembers as the story of his life, where sort of as a young boy, his family was massacred by the Comanches, and he's taken in by a Cheyenne tribe, and he's raised as one of the tribe, and then he sort of falls in with goes back to like white society, and he's partially raised by a preacher, and he alternately he meets up with Wild Bill Hickok. He becomes a gunslinger. He becomes an Indian scout, and he claims to be the lone survivor of the massacre at Little Bighorn, which is a really fantastic sequence with General Custer played, completely off his rocker as a conceited, insane tyrant. It's a really good performance by Richard Mulligan. So yeah, this movie, it's based on the 1964 novel by Thomas Berger, which is a really good book. I've read the book. It's pretty fantastic, and this film absolutely does justice to it. Great cast there: Martin Balsam, Jeff Corey, Chief Dan George is really good in this as Jack Crabb's Cheyenne grandfather, who he won an Academy Award. No, he was nominated for an Academy Award for this. He didn't win. And Faye Dunaway is in this. Yeah, so Arthur Penn, he directed Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, and then Alice's Restaurant in 1969, and then Little Big Man in 1970. So it was a pretty fantastic run of movies. And the film, it's kind of its portrayal of Native Americans, I think, is to be commended. This film definitely is political. It draws parallels between the white cavalry massacring the Native Americans and what was going on at the time in Vietnam with the Americans and the Vietnamese. So we'll just open this up and see that it's a gatefold. Yeah. So yeah, I really like this film. It's kind of, it's epic, it's comic, it does something really interesting with its source material. It's very well acted. I mean, Dustin Hoffman, his breakout role was as Benjamin Braddock in The Graduate in 1967. He did Midnight Cowboy in 1969, and then he did this in 1970. So this is that time when Hoffman was really blowing people away with his, the diversity of his his acting talents and the range of characters he was doing. Special shout out, of course, to the legendary makeup artist Dick Smith, who did the old age makeup for Dustin Hoffman in the scenes that portray Jack Crabb as an old man. Like, he looks absolutely, he looks positively ancient. It was really, really convincing makeup, but it was really revolutionary for its time, and it still looks really good. It still looks really, really good today. The film has a very it's got a very loose narrative. I mean, Jack Crabbe is sort of a narrator with an unreliable memory. So the narrative has a sort of a deliberately hazy, sort of like unreliable feel to it, which is really good. The screenplay was by Calder Willingham. Yeah, so the supporting cast is really good. Faye Dunaway turns up in this. She'd worked with Arthur Penn and Bonnie and Clyde, and she plays Mrs. Pendrake, the wife of a preacher in this. The great character actor Martin Balsam plays Allardyce T. Merriweather, a traveling medicine salesman that Jack Crabbe falls in with. There's such a great like gallery of weird characters in this movie, and it's sort of the film. It definitely like blends the poignant and the comic. I mean, this is a movie that's very funny at times, but also very moving and very sad in other times. Yeah, so good film to have, and this is a really good looking release as well. So the 1964 novel Little Big Man by Thomas Berger it's a really good read. It's a very interesting deconstruction of the myth of the American frontier. There was a sequel that Thomas Berger wrote, The Return of Little Big Man, in 1999. So that was many years after the original novel. Although, as far as I'm aware, there was never any adaptation of the sequel. So if we look at the LaserDiscs for The Lion in Winter and Little Big Man, we can see that they have, very similar design sleeves. But The Lion in Winter is 20th Century Fox Video, and Little Big Man is CBS Fox. So The Lion in Winter is from 1982. Little Big Man is from 1984. So we can sort of see that the name of the distribution company changed between these years. So that's all for now, but as you can see, there's still some more to go.